Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Optimizing Your Success. I am Dr. Ruth Gotian, and our guests, we have amazing guests each and every week, and today is no different. We have somebody who literally looked down on us for a long time. She also looked up. Today, we have astronaut, aquanaut, artist, and author, all the A's, Nicole Stott. She's also an engineer, so we'll stick that in too. We got another vowel. So we have an amazing guest. She's really going to tell us all about her experiences and her new book, Back to Earth, which just came out last week and is doing incredibly well. She was at the Kennedy Space Center and the line was wrapped around. They had to keep it open for another half hour so that she could sign all those books. So join me in welcoming Nicole Stott. And with me, I have the incredible panel once again. Our change maker who can make any change happen with a special passion for hearing access, Janice Lintz. Our resident physician scientist, not that he's a resident, he is our physician scientist and senior contributor to Forbes, Dr. Bruce Wiley. Our award-winning photographer and founder of the nonprofit Photo Wings to get you to think deeper through photography, Susie Katz. Our pediatrician and somebody who's trying to get us not to worry about should we do things, Dr. Allison Escalante, and our astronaut, aquanaut, engineer, artist, author, Nicole Stott. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Nicole. Thanks for joining us on this Monday night.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm in awe.
Now, I know Nicole because she is one of the astronauts who is featured in my upcoming book, The Success Factor. And we were communicating back and forth for well over a year. And I knew that when her book comes out, she would have to join us on the show because her road to being an astronaut was not a straight road. It did not come easily. It doesn't come easily to anyone. So, Nicole, can you tell us your story, how that journey even began? And then you have to tell everyone, what is an aquanaut?
Yeah. Well, I think really, yeah, it wasn't direct. I mean, I get asked all the time, oh, did you want to be an astronaut since you were, a little girl? And I think I always thought it was cool, right? I thought, and I also, in parallel with that, pretty much my whole young life thought that's only something other special people get to do. Why would they ever pick me? I had watched the first moon landing. I think at 6 or 7, even then, you realize that's something really extraordinary, but it just seemed like something that other people get to do. Growing up, I developed a love for flying and wanting to know how things fly. My parents very thankfully shared what they loved with me and my sisters, which was awesome. And part of that was flying. My dad built and flew small airplanes. So as a family, we hung out a lot at the local airport. And then somewhere along the way, I think while I was studying at university, aeronautical engineering at the time, I was like, man, if you want to know how airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? And that led me to a job as an engineer with NASA at the Kennedy Space Center, which was right about the time where they were starting to get back into flying after the Challenger accident. There was a bunch of young engineers brought in, and we were getting the program back up and running. It was really fantastic. And during that 10 years I spent at Kennedy Space Center, I saw astronauts come through. I saw what we were doing to get the spaceships ready for them to fly. And I saw that 99.9% of what an astronaut does is not flying in space. And a majority of it, as much I could tell, was a lot like what I was doing already as a NASA engineer. And that encouraged me to consider it. And I spoke to some people I considered to be mentors. They did nothing more, honestly, than encourage me to pick up the pen and fill out the application, which I am very thankful for. It's like they gave me permission to do the one thing I had total control of. And without that encouragement, I know I would not have had the confidence on my own to pick up that pen. I thank them every time I see them. And then down the road, got selected to be an astronaut after the second try. First try didn't work, but they offered me a cool job flying on the airplanes that we were using to train the astronauts how to land the space shuttle. and then was selected in the year 2000, and was fortunate in my career as an astronaut to fly twice in space. First mission for a little over 3 months on the International Space Station, and then second flight was 2 weeks, not long enough, and the final flight of the Space Shuttle Discovery. So that's kind of the space thing and how I got there, all as short
Wow.
as I
So
can make
there's
it.
so much there that we can unpack. Let's start with the fact that you made that decision. Why not me? Right? Why not me? Why not me? Why can't I be an astronaut? But there's a difference between saying maybe one day versus picking up the pen and filling out the application. And I think the fact that you had your mentor encourage you. So Dr. Kathy Kramswork out of Boston talks about the two main roles of a mentor. One is to help you with your career, and the other is actually to give you that psychosocial support. And it sounds like that's what he did. Now, you had a great mentor. Do you want to give a shout out to him?
Yeah, a little shout out to Jay Honeycutt. Yeah, awesome, awesome, awesome human being, Earthling. And yeah, and the key I think in it was he could have prefaced that whole, okay, Nicole, pick up the pen and fill out the application in a number of different ways, right? He could have said, oh, Nicole, you'll make the greatest astronaut there ever was. You got to fill out that application. He didn't say that, but he might think that now. I don't know. We'd like to think that, right? But what he didn't do was say, oh, Nicole, yeah, why don't you go ahead and fill out that, but thousands of people apply for this, you just be prepared that it might, he didn't drag it down at all. He really and truly just said, hey, pick up the pen, fill out the application. You got to do that. That's the one thing you have control of that you can do in this whole process. And I am so thankful for that, because I think if he had qualified it anyway, maybe even with the "you make the greatest astronaut ever was," or the so many people apply and you got to be ready not to get. If he had done either of those, I don't know that I would have filled that application out. I think just the straight, kind of transparent, to the point, here's what you got to do, is what made me think, okay, yeah, I can do that. Because
Control
otherwise
what
I
you can
probably would have
control.
doubted myself right out of it, right?
But that's why you need that, right? Because
Yeah.
high achievers control what they can control. And the one thing you were able to control was actually filling out the application and turning it in. So tell everyone who Jay Honeycutt was, because he's a pretty important person.
He's an awesome human. He was a NASA engineer, and was, an extraordinary engineer with the early space, human spaceflight programs, in Apollo in particular. He was, one of the people that solved the Apollo 13 problems. He is, when I think about all of the training equipment that I used within the space shuttle and the space station program, he's the one who in the very early days developed those kind of simulators and the scenarios that we would go through when we were training to be astronauts. He was the right-hand person for a number of the really significant leaders in the NASA human spaceflight side of things. And then he came to Kennedy Space Center, and he was one of my very first bosses there, running what we called Space Shuttle Operations program, which is where just all of us in the hangar, out at the launch pad, on the runway, getting the vehicles ready to fly and then getting them back off the runway and ready to fly again. And then later he ended up as the center director at Kennedy Space Center. So running the whole place, and just, I think about what he did for me, and it was kind of like you said, he knew how to express to us what we had control of too. And philosophies that I think have stayed with me, not just in my work life, but in life in general, like believing that there are solutions to every challenging problem, going into those with a here's how we can, not why we can't approach to things. Turning what might be considered the least desirable place to work in the space shuttle program into the most desirable place to work, and bringing the success out in all of the people that he worked with. And And I love it. When you're in the middle of it, sometimes you don't even really realize that's going on. But then when you can reflect on it, especially when somebody, encourages you, lifts you up, and you can reflect on how that, I don't know, just that role they've had in your life. It's really nice to be able to discover those little trinkets that have kind of stayed with you too afterwards.
It's so true. And Nicole, you and I have spoken quite a bit about um, your philosophy and also what Jay really instilled in you of um, just the control what you can control, but also when you're faced with a challenge, which when you're faced with the problem, it's not about giving up, which is why you didn't give up after that first time you submitted the application, you reapplied. And every time you're faced with a challenge, it's really about what is the strategy I haven't thought of to actually make this happen. And this is something that one of our panelists, Janice Lintz, knows so much about. She lives and breathes this every day with her work on creating change. Janice, you want to chime in here? Is Janice there? Okay, we'll continue. So, so Nicole, so you didn't get in the first time. You applied the second time. Tell us how long that whole process happened between the first and the second time.
It was right about 2 years. And after I applied the first time and didn't get selected, I really feel like I was, it's kind of like looking at the opportunities and when you're crying in your bedroom because you didn't get picked, right? But then, then these things come along. It's like I don't know, there's almost like this magic in what was meant to be and, the way opportunities open up and stuff. And I was told, we're not picking you this time for the astronaut office. And, they didn't give me an indication that they would later on either, but they offered me a job at the Johnson Space Center in Houston as a flight engineer on this shuttle training aircraft, this really cool modified corporate jet that was used to train the astronaut pilots how to land the space shuttle. And I mean, really, I was like, I was sad that I didn't get picked to be an astronaut that time, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to go work on this airplane, flying on this airplane that I've been begging to fly on the entire time, that I was working at Kennedy Space Center. I'd see it come in, flying out at the landing facility to train the astronauts how to land the space shuttle. And I'm like, oh my gosh, please let me go, let me go. And then on the little T-38 jets that the people would fly in, and I begged to do that. And now I was going to get to go, not just, be a part of that group, but be flying in those airplanes, helping train astronauts how to fly. I didn't think it could get any better. My office was going to be on an airport. How could it be any cooler? Working with people that love flying. And then 2 years later, I applied again and was selected. But the whole, it was so cool. And the whole thing and that whole process, which, there was certainly a method to their madness. When they told me, hey, Nicole, we'd like you to come work at this other job, they said, we'd love to, consider you next time, but we want to have you get some more operations experience. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, I just worked in space shuttle operations for 10 years. What do they mean? Get some more operations experience.
What is the code word?
Yeah, I know. And so, but the day I got there, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're talking about flight crew operations, working as a team in a really complex aviation environment, similar to what it would be on a space shuttle or on a space station. And I loved it. The people were awesome. The work was great. And then 2 years later, I got selected. And what I tell people is, man, and I think this applies to other stuff too, not just astronaut selection, but man, if they offer you another job, a different job than the one you've applied for, you might want to seriously consider that. Because when I got there, I was taking the place of a gentleman named Steve Swanson, who was getting selected in the 1998 class. And then when I left in 2000, another young man named Shane Kimbrough, who's on the space station right now, came in and filled my slot. And so this was a place that they very purposefully used to just get that other little bit of info about you, right? To see how you might work in this group. And so, I was sad about not getting picked, but I think about it now, I'm like, man, the opportunity that opened up for me there, that was something I never even imagined happening and was so awesome. And then led to that other thing that I, had originally applied for. Sometimes we just don't know, the best path for ourselves, and it kind of comes out of disappointment even, right?
Well, I guess then it wasn't a
Yeah.
failure. It was what you took away from that experience and what you learned from that experience. Now, I know Janice is back on.
Yes.
And if there is somebody who knows about not giving up and finding new strategies and new ways to deal with a challenge, this is one person who she doesn't stop. This is why she is America's change maker. Janice, you're back. You can join us.
Yeah, I was here. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't ever view it. Ruth and you and I have discussed this. I never view it as failure. I always view it as I just need to repivot. So this past week, the FDA announced over-the-counter hearing aids. And I've been working on this project since 2009. And I am so beyond excited by it because FDA actually included my testimony in the footnotes, which was not only shocking, but really thrilling. But I've been, working at this since 2009. People told me it couldn't. Nobody, people I spoke with within the hearing loss community didn't even understand what I was asking for, bringing transparency and accountability. I was asking for testing of hearing aids. When I spoke to FDA commissioners at the Aspen Institute, people looked at me as if I had two heads because they didn't even realize that hearing aids weren't being tested, that they were passing under the functional equivalency standard of their predecessor. And over and over, I kept being told, like, it's just not going to happen. This is a big ship to turn. You can't just turn the FDA. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing it. And I filed petitions. This year I filed a petition. I wrote to the president. I just kept going, and I was like, I don't really care. And previously, when I needed hearing aid compatibility for hearing aids to work with cell phones, I called the FDA commissioner every single day to get voluntary compliance until they finally did. And eventually, if you don't give up, you're the only one standing left. And I think they just have to respect you at a certain point for, just tirelessly not giving up. And I think what Nicole was saying, like, you just keep coming. And I think people are kind of impressed by people who keep showing up.
Absolutely. And I think it's also not worrying about how you are perceived by other people when you want to continue doing this, which is totally in Allison's wheelhouse. Allison, can you weigh in on that? But you got to unmute first.
You're doing what I did now.
Yeah, absolutely. So what specifically would you like me to weigh in on, Ruth?
So this is really, it's not worrying about what it's going to look like and what you should be doing and what the expectations are, but actually going with what you know is right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that the other part there is when you truly know what's right, you have to be willing to be really irritating to others, which I'm quite sure, Janice, that you have been.
In a good way. In a good way.
In a good way.
I will tell you, Congressman Lewis told me change doesn't happen without a struggle. And I hear him in my ears saying that. So once he said that, I had no problem doing it.
For me and my work, I feel like every day involves struggle. Sometimes it's against a culture that tells people they need to be a certain way. It affects parents, it affects kids, it affects us in our professional lives. Sometimes it's that struggle to advocate for a patient and get what they need. And even as I said, being irritating, in the physician-patient relationship, that's generally not helpful. So what I'm looking for there is empathetically identifying really what are the key issues, where is the problem, what's the holdup. And I think that sometimes these subjects make me just recognize that I was raised not by doctors but by an engineer. And I think, Nicole, I know you'll relate to this, but I often find that I think like an engineer. Like, let's get under there and let's identify what is the actual problem, what's the sticking point, and then what specifically do we need to do about it. But engineers are practical. So for them, it's also, and what can we accomplish today, with a viewpoint of eventually getting where we need to. Does that correlate to what you were looking for, Ruth?
Well, yes, and I think it's a great segue. Nicole, the astronauts can take certain things up to space, and you took something pretty special that I don't think anyone else took before you, and possibly since, that has really just taken your post astronaut life in a new direction. What was that you took with you?
Well, yeah, we have the opportunity to take up like a small bag of personal items with us, and I mean, the short answer is it was a watercolor kit, but it's not something I would have thought of on my own. I think we're so concerned about, okay, having our checklists in the right order, making sure we've got everything we need, as astronauts, not to screw up the astronaut-y stuff that we're going to be doing in space, right? You don't want to be the one that messes things up. And so you want to have all of that like ready to go. And then of course we know we get this little bag of personal things. So for me, it was really important that my son, who was 7 when I flew the first time, that he had the opportunity to give me something that I can take that he wants me to have there.
Oh, wow.
So that was like this little stuffed, black and white stuffed dog named Sports. And so Sports would be with me, whenever I could, like sitting on the robotic workstation or in my crew compartment or wherever.
Oh,
And
nice.
then, like pictures of family and friends and, that you could take a picture of in space to share with them, and t-shirt from your high school, that kind of stuff. That's what I thought of when I thought of like personal items. But one of the women a dear friend, Mary Jane Anderson, who was helping me get all of this stuff ready and all the official stuff that I was able to take too, like my one pair of khaki pants that I got to wear for 3 months on the space station.
One pair?
One pair. And it was totally fine. If you want to have that conversation, we can, but it really was fine for 3. I'll tell you, and just short story is, you don't wear them when you're working out or anything. You just wear them during the day. And unless you get like food juice on them or something that just stinks, your clothes don't lay on your body the same way. They're floating on you in microgravity. So they're not laying on you, getting all those oils and the sweat and the, that they do down here on Earth. So that's a short story of that. But anyway, so Mary Jane encouraged me. She's like, Nicole, you're going to be living there, not just working there. You're going to be there for months at a time. Why in your little like personal items, consider something that you enjoy doing down here on Earth that you might want to bring to space with you. So that's where the watercolor kit came from. I had no idea if anybody had ever brought a watercolor kit with them or painted in space before I did or not. But I did know that, astronauts from the earliest time, cosmonauts even, have been doing artistic things in space since the very beginning. Alexei Leonov, one of the very first people to fly in space, brought colored pencils to sketch orbital sunrises and sunsets. And he did charcoal portraits of his crewmates on that historic Apollo Soyuz mission. And people have been writing poetry and playing music. And it's really, it's like bringing the humanity, putting the human in human spaceflight. And I think we're going to see more and more of that because we want to do it. But I think we need to do it too. We need to have the access to those kinds of things, no matter where we are. And painting with watercolors it was one of the personal highlights of my experience there. And it has certainly been an influence on, the way I've chosen to communicate the experience I had in space. And then of course, working, with the kids on the Space for Art Foundation projects and things. But
so why don't you tell us a little bit about that work now?
Yeah. So this art, kind of beautiful art spacesuit behind me is one of the examples of the projects that we've done. And it all started, I was doing my own art after retiring from NASA and using it because I think art is just like this amazing universal communicator, right? You can talk to people, introduce things to people through art and other creative means. even if they don't, somebody who doesn't know there's an International Space Station, right? I could use my art to share the backstory, and whether they like my art or not, I could get them excited about this international partnership that's been going on in space for over 20 years, and how all this work we're doing is ultimately about improving life on Earth. And, you know, they walk away with the app on their phone that they can plug their zip code in to say, oh, there's a space station flying over, and they want to learn more about it, right?
Wow.
And, but I got introduced to an artist who had founded the art and medicine program at the Pediatric Cancer Center at MD Anderson in Houston. And long story short, we went from building one art spacesuit with kids in one hospital to now this suit was created. It's all original artwork from the kids, quilted together by our real spacesuit company, ILC Dover, the ones that made the spacesuit I even used to walk in space on the space station. And they've been volunteering with us since the very beginning. This suit has artwork from kids in hospitals and refugee centers in over 50 countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
And we just completed, it's on its way to me, I should have it tomorrow, a new spacesuit called Beyond that has art from at least one child in every country on the planet. And it's so cool. And I'm going to be taking it to Scotland this week for the UN Climate Change Conference. And Beyond is going to be there as the ambassador for Spaceship Earth, and with messaging of this intersection between personal and planetary health. And I think it just fits perfectly with our Space for Art Foundation motto, which is to unite a planetary community of children through the awe and wonder of space exploration and the healing power of art. And I will just say that I discovered this work, honestly, I feel like I went to space. I got to do the things I did as a NASA astronaut and engineer so that I could be now on this mission, working with these kids around the world and doing this space-themed art therapy.
Oh,
Really
I love
incredible.
this. I love this. And if there's someone who truly understands, probably has a visceral reaction, a good one to everything you're saying, it's Susie Katz, because she does this type of work with photography. Susie, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, the first thing is I want to see the paintings that you did in space. I'd love to see when, and also, did you think differently when you were there than you did on Earth? But what you're speaking to is what we refer to as medical humanities. And I actually made a personal video about that because there's so many ways that people don't think about the arts as being components to who we are.
Yeah.
And also to speak to what you were we were talking about originally, the critical thinking, that everything we do in life helps us with every other thing we do in life. And that you might have chosen different colors when you were young, for example.
Yeah.
I think the experimenting and the different jobs that you had in photography, we photograph with different lenses from different angles to try to tell a story. We may do it 50 different ways, but it all helps you understand the bigger picture, which has made you more of who you are and how you can help the world, I believe.
Yeah,
Bruce-
and I'll tell you, sorry, Bruce, but I just I love what you said. First of all, I had to write down medical humanities because I've never heard that term before. I love it. And I'll tell you, you know, I don't know. I've never felt some of the ways I feel as I do when I'm working with these kids, when we're going into the hospital settings, you know, working with the kids in the refugee centers, even some, you know, very rural schools around the world. And, you know, and kids actually in places that you hope is the worst thing they ever have to go through in their entire lives, right? And they come into these sessions, and a lot of them, I'm convinced, like their parents have dragged them in. They would much rather go back to their bed and just sleep and be, you know, done with it, you know, after the treatment they've gone through, whatever. And yet they come in and all of a sudden they're sitting up straighter. They're stronger and they're talking. I mean, it's like they're transcending this place that they're in, right? And that's just like by providing them with some inspiration through, you know, the space exploration stuff and the ability to have an outlet through the art. And I mean, they're talking about their futures. It's like they're not in that place. And And then
Wow.
they just express these otherworldly things to us. And I imagine that the same thing is happening with the kind of the evolution of the kind of like the photographic experience for people, where they're starting to think about things that you might not have ever thought about when you were taking that individual photo. And for these kids, I mean, I would hear things like, oh my gosh, Nicole, what you do as an astronaut must be a lot like what I'm going through as a patient in the hospital. And I was just so shocked by that. These little kids saying things like, yeah, well, you don't get to eat the same food while you're in space. You don't get to see your mommy and daddy the same way, or you can't just go outdoors anytime you want. They're doing all kinds of tests on you. Your body's changing. I think there's radiation. I mean, stuff that just, I mean, the hairs on like every part of my body, like raising up, like how in the world is this child in this place thinking about this kind of thing? And it made me know, I mean, it just made me know this is what I'm meant to do. And for all these people that are going to go further out in space where you end up having Earth out the window anymore, we've got to look at the same kind of, I don't know, I'd like it medical humanities for astronauts that aren't going to see Earth like Earth anymore, that are going to be in relatively confined spaces where, my hope is that the Star Trek holodeck can become a reality for them, where they can make that connection to, their home planet and something creative. But we have to absolutely consider that, and not just for kids in hospitals, but for, in other ways as well.
I believe in design thinking that they came up with a way that rather than having I always forget if it's CAT scan or MRI, where you have to completely go in, rather than just have that skewering machine, I think they painted it like a spaceship and had music that related. I think maybe Bruce can speak more to that.
Yeah.
Bruce, you there?
Yes. So Nicole, fascinating, because I'm very interested in the fact that you've really bridged many different fields and areas. I think one of the issues is many times people get slotted into a particular lane, but these things aren't separate. Like they aren't like, I don't know, broccoli and French fries, things that are completely different. They are actually mixed with each other. And I remember, going through medicine, many times people try to typecast you as, okay, this is medicine, and then this is writing, or this is art, and you're supposed to focus on a body part, whatever. So tell us a little more about how these are actually intermingled quite a lot, right? Art and engineering and being in space.
Absolutely. And I would say that those French fries and broccoli are related. They are of the Earth, right? So there's something, it's like looking at Earth from space, right? This whole, I mean, oh my gosh, I live on a planet, this is something we learned when we were in kindergarten, right? And yet we don't tend to maintain it. I would argue we need our kids to maintain that in their, be present for them. This idea of living on a planet, everybody being Earthlings, thin blue line, only border that matters, that kind of thing. But, I love what you're saying about this tendency for us to kind of channel people. And I watched that with my son in school. And as much as I'm excited about, young girls and young boys, being interested in STEM, this whole science, technology, engineering, math thing, I worry that we went so far overboard with that we did it at the expense of humanities, of not just the medical unit, but all humanities, of social studies, of art, of, giving our kids the opportunity to use their whole brains to be problem solvers, right? And that's where, I mean, I just look at it like, the best engineers I know are some of the most creative artists I know as well. And it's because they can think creatively about whatever problem they're trying to solve. And they look for ways to communicate it that are, of whatever the most appropriate tool for communicating it might be. And, I think about like Hubble Space Telescope images. The scientists, the engineers could be looking strictly at the ones and zeros from that. We might never have seen a false colored image of a galaxy, but they realize too that, wow, our brains process that easier. So if I make these gases this color and these gases this color and the distance, this range of colors, I can not only get a beautiful image, but I can process that better and more quickly understand what I'm looking at than the ones and zeros. And so I think the art has been embedded since the very beginning. We just went askew a little bit on this whole STEM thing. And I think the fact that they're throwing the A back in there now for STEAM shows that we're starting to realize, man, we need to kind of consider this whole, approach to education. And I'll use the word renaissance, let's be a little bit more renaissance in the way that, we think about education. And I know there's others on here that I'm sure can speak more eloquently to this than I can. I just know there's a
Allison
lot
is
of
dying to chime in. She's
go
dying
Allison.
to chime in very quickly, because then we want to get to your Aquanaut story.
Well, as a pediatrician and someone who studies child development and human performance, there's a couple false distinctions I have to point out, and I will be quick. Number one, the distinction between child and adult. I think this is false. I think that we come into adulthood and we may add to our prior capacities, but we still have that child in us. We still need play. We still need time for creativity. Number two, the research, the body of research finding that creativity is fundamental to everything we do is huge at this point. There was one study I wrote up all about how fundamentally the same thought processes were involved with the science students and the art students at a particular university. And just like we know that studying music, for instance, boosts your math ability, it is very likely that studying or practicing across disciplines where you're using problem solving and creativity and writing and taking photos. I am an amateur photographer myself. It's going to just boost all of it. Yes, I'm very excited. Last distinction that's incorrect that our young people are being fed is that the path to future happiness is to find your passion, and you need to find it young. And I deal with totally distraught high schoolers on a regular basis in my office who are terrified because they haven't discovered their passion at 16 or 17. And how are they supposed to map their path through college? So I always give them my winding path. Last thing, tons of research.
That's because they haven't found the mentor project yet, Allison.
Right? Last thing, tons of research showing that if we study across disciplines, that people with meandering career paths often end up with the most exciting outcomes.
Beautiful, Allison. Excellent. Thank you. And it's so true. And Nicole, you're right. They put the A back into it for the STEAM. And I definitely think you definitely found your post-astronaut time passion. And because I think all the panelists will agree with me, you just lit up when you were talking about the art and working with the children. It was just a different person. I mean, you were excited about the astronaut, but that was clearly a chapter in your life. And now you're on this new chapter and you were just bouncing off the walls. You were clearly so excited. Now, I really want to talk before we finish. I cannot finish without you telling us about you being an Aquanaut and tell everyone what that's all about. And then we're going to wrap up with hearing about your book. Tell us, what is an Aquanaut, what you did, tell us the whole story.
So an Aquanaut, I can never remember what the actual time frame is that they give, if it's spending the night saturated underwater or what, but so in preparation to go to the International Space Station, we do all this training that we call expeditionary training. We go out to the Utah Canyonlands and we hike around by ourselves for 6 days, with a particular mission in mind. We do winter survival, land survival, sea survival, all the survivals you can do. We do it to, ultimately you're trying to figure out, what are your own strengths and weaknesses? How do you work as a really good team? And, and then to apply that to how you'd work as a crew in space. And the absolute best place was to go live underwater for 18 days. And that was at a undersea laboratory, the only one of its kind. It's called Aquarius. It's about the size of a school bus, which is roughly the size of one of the modules on the International Space Station. So that was nice. It sits at 60 feet underwater off the coast of Key Largo. And it's so perfect because it's a real extreme environment. So, when you get down to 60 feet underwater on your, scuba gear and you're down there for more than an hour, your body's so saturated with nitrogen that you can't just swim safely to the surface. And So, about this whole thing you hear about the bends and that kind of thing, but you'd have to go through a pretty elaborate, process of getting to the surface to be safe. And so we live in that environment for extended periods of time. Ours was 18 days. There's been shorter missions. But you're in this place that's so close to what it would be like to be in space. You're surrounded by water that you can't just go out into without special equipment, just like you can't just go outside your spaceship without special equipment on. We were doing all kinds of research and experiments inside the habitat, just like we would if we were on the space station. Our whole mission paralleled what the strategic goals of NASA were at the time. And so everything we were doing was very similar to what it would be like in space. And with the clincher that when something goes wrong, as it will at some point, you can't just swim to the surface to escape it. You have to deal with it at 60 feet underwater with your crew until you can get in a safe configuration that would allow you to get to the surface. And we all kind of joke that, we get to go live and work in inner space to prepare to live and work in outer space. And I am, man, even if I had never gotten the chance to fly in space, I am so thankful for that time underwater, to be just kind of surrounded by the planet, to be the odd one there, like the big group are coming and looking at our window every night saying, who's in there now in the aquarium, whatever. And I mean, we were not the ones that were in our normal place, right? But we had to figure out how to survive there. And man, there's so much going on below the surface that we just don't think about in our daily lives. And so that's, kind of my lesson, other than being prepared to fly on a space station, is just, man, there's always so much more going on around us. And that we tend to not appreciate for the most part.
Wow. And you really learned to appreciate it both from your work as an astronaut and an aquanaut. And you actually wrote a whole book about it, which launched last week. Tell us a little bit about the book, Back to Earth.
Yeah, it's not a memoir. I'll start with that. I mean, there are like little memoir-y tidbits in there that are appropriate for whatever, the storyline is at the time. But the main, I guess, motivation story behind the book is like really just how we've, as like this international partnership, lived and worked on this mechanical life support system in space together peacefully, successfully for over 20 years now. And we do it in a way that is just such a great example for how we should be living like crewmates here on Spaceship Earth. So each of the chapters is meant as, a description of one of the ways that we as crew on a space station have the success that we do, and how we work these ways together, and how those kinds of things can be brought back to Earth. It showcases a little bit of, some of the science, the things that we're doing in space on the space station that are ultimately about improving life on Earth. And then I try to showcase in each chapter at least one person that I've met along the way who's really living like crew down here already. They are like exemplary, at least in my experience, Earthlings who are every day working to make life better for all life we share the planet with. And that's the way I think about the space station, that we need to bring all of what we're doing there back to Earth in a way that's relatable for people. And my hope is that people will read the book and really feel a call to action themselves, like, okay, what can I do? How can I, if I haven't already, shift my mindset from being a passenger here on Spaceship Earth to being I would say, proactively involved crewmate, if that
Beautiful.
makes sense.
And where, Nicole, where can people find your book, Back to Earth?
Well, you can find it at any of your favorite booksellers, online, in the bookstores. I've got a link on my website, backtoearthbook.com, that provides, some nice links to booksellers. And yeah, I'm really thankful. Thanks for asking about it. I hope that people will read it and feel compelled to learn more about something they've read in the book, and how they can use that to find their own, something to extend on in their own lives that will feel good for them, but will also be doing good for the rest of us around them.
Nicole, knowing you and hearing these stories over the last year and a half, and seeing you through the process of, excuse me, writing this book. I know that this is your personal call to action for having all of us live like crew. I've heard you use that phrase many times when we've chatted. So I know that this is a personal mission for you. So I am really excited and thankful that you shared all about your career and your vision for Back to Earth for the book. And I'm excited for people to read it and learn more about this. So thank you for joining us. Thank you also to the Mentor Project for hosting us today and each and every week. You can find out more about Nicole and Susie and Bruce and Janice and Allison and myself. It's all, the links are in the comments. Go check out Nicole Stott, astronaut, aquanaut, engineer, author. I think I missed an artist. Go check it all out. Check out her book, Back to Earth. And if you didn't think that all of this was cool and amazing enough, she was also in a Super Bowl commercial. So go check that out as well. We will see you guys next week. Thank you all for joining us. Bye, everybody.